God creates the laws of nature. They predate the universe. They're not physical. They're outside of time. They can create something from nothing. That's the definition of God in this universe.
Shalom and welcome to Hebrew Voices. I'm here today with Dr. Gerald Schroeder. He has his bachelor's, master's, and PhD from MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and is a renowned physicist who has written about reconciling the Bible with science. Shalom, Dr. Schroeder. We've had you on the program before. I think you probably don't remember.
No, I do remember, but I don't remember the date.
It must have been like almost 10 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah, I was trying to get a minion cake from a bakery. I think it was called New York Bakery or something on Emek Street in Jerusalem. And your wife was right in front of me and she got my cake.
Okay, that I don't remember. But,
and it was like the day before we did the recording. And you mentioned, as we were, getting to know each other, something about a minion cake. I'm like, that was my minion cake. That was your wife. It's a small world. So, Dr. Schroeder, let's jump into it. I had a guest on my program recently who talked about his, from a scientific perspective, his explanation of the world's only 6,000 years old, and you have a different explanation of the age of the universe, or the age of the Earth in particular, I think is maybe what we're more interested in.
Well, it's into the age of the universe, so it's
okay.
The same thing.
So how old is the Earth?
Who was the person? So I'll have some perspective here.
It was Kent Hovind.
Kent
Hovind. He is a Christian evangelical young Earth creationist.
Okay, first question I have to ask him is, how fluent is he in Hebrew? That was the first question you should have asked him. I didn't hear the recording. If he's not fluent in Hebrew, he should stay out of the argument, since the whole text is based on the Hebrew text. The whole argument is totally related to there's a proverb. It says, a word well spoken is Proverb 25. A word well spoken is like apples of gold in dishes of silver. The commentator Maimonides in about the year, make me guess, 2030, about almost 1,000 years ago, writes, what was King Solomon talking about when he wrote this? A word well spoken is like apples of gold in dishes of silver. And he writes like this. This is long before anyone was worried about dinosaurs or cavemen. We're talking about almost 1,000 years ago, okay? He says the Torah has several levels of meaning. A word well spoken is like apples of gold in dishes of silver. The dishes of silver is a literal text of the Torah. And when you look at a dish from a distance, you see the silver dish, but you can't see what's inside it. Only when you look deep into the dish itself, you find the apples of gold. What's the silver dish? The literal text of the Bible. What's the golden apples? The secrets in why one word was chosen over another. Now you notice it wasn't apples and silver in dishes of gold. It was golden apples in dishes of silver. The silver is the literal text. The gold, being more valuable, takes that text way beyond the meaning. The silver dish has huge value, obviously. No one's throwing out a silver dish, at least not in my house. I don't know about your house, not in my house. And
I don't think we have any silver dishes. But
the apples of, beg your pardon?
I don't think we have any silver dishes in my house, but if we did, we probably wouldn't throw them away.
So anyway, so the deeper meanings are the subtleties within the text. And the subtleties of the text allow you to see that there's a reality of two different perspectives of time. And that's the whole answer to the age of the universe. The universe is 6,000 or whatever years old from a perspective of the biblical perspective looking forward. But we don't live in that perspective. That's the Bible's perspective. I don't like to say God's perspective. It's the perspective that God gave in the written text. And that is why in the 6 days of and this is when I get to Jerry Schroeder, I'll tell you it's my idea, okay?
Okay.
The calculations are totally mine, but the idea that there are two perspectives is thousands of years old. The text and it is Maimonides and then it doesn't matter. They're all from the same period, about 1,000 years ago. That why is the numbering of the 6 days of Genesis rather bizarre? The numbering of the text is 6 days. At the end of each day, there's a couplet that appears nowhere else in the entire Hebrew Bible, and that is in the English translation. And there was evening, and there was morning, and then the day is numbered. You're probably familiar with that from your help. This happened in the beginning. God creates the heavens and the earth. There's this, and there's evening and morning, day one. More things happening. Evening day, a second day, third day, fourth day, fifth day, the sixth day. So the question stands out like a flame. Why does the text say day one? Evening, morning, day one. It says second day, third day, fourth day, fifth day, the sixth day. Give me a first day. Why doesn't the text say there was evening? This is not me speaking. As I said, I'll let you know when it's my idea. But this forms the entire basis for all the calculations that the universe is these 6,000 years old, and the universe is 14 billion years old, from two different perspectives. The text writes day one because there had not yet been a second day. That means the perspective of time is from the beginning looking forward. In Genesis, it's not from Sinai. By the time you get to Sinai, there've been hundreds of thousands of days. If the perspective of time in the Bible for these 6 days was from Sinai, the text would have written this evening and morning a first day, because it's been thousands of days, till you get to Moses on Sinai. You had to go through the whole Egypt experience and the Exodus and the wandering, etc. So the text says day one because the Torah sees time from the beginning looking forward. That's not now. There wasn't yet a second day means it's from the beginning. The only time there wasn't a second day is on the first day. And therefore the text writes as evening, morning, Yom Echad, day one. Now there are many, I gotta tell you, there are many unfortunate, you refer to me as Jerry or Yaakov, I refer to you as Nehemia, right? I'm having to make, okay. My Hebrew is Yaakov. Okay. So there are unfortunately many mistranslations that write there as evening and morning into English and into other languages also. A first day, the fact is the Hebrew says day one. There's no question about the Hebrew. So the Torah sees time from before there was a time, there was a second day, which means the Torah sees time. The Torah meaning the Hebrew word for the Bible. The word Torah is the Hebrew name for the 5 books of Moses. So Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. So the Bible, the Torah sees time from the beginning looking forward until you get to Adam, where the description of time changes and becomes earth time. So we have this cosmic view of time looking forward from the beginning.
So it's really interesting what you're saying. I just pulled up on BibleHub.com because I read it in the Hebrew like you do. So I actually wasn't aware that there's, or I certainly didn't remember that in Genesis 1:5, a lot of translations have the first day. I'm looking at NIV, New Living Translation, King James Bible, New King James. But then New American Standard Bible has there was evening and there was morning one day, right? So some of them do have in English one day, but then other ones have the first day or the first day. Even they've added the word the. So that's interesting. I didn't remember that. Okay.
Yeah.
So you're making a distinction between the first day and one day.
I did no. The commentators 1,000 years ago made the distinction.
Okay.
I put the numbers in.
Okay. All right.
I didn't make that distinction.
Okay.
And the commentary is the reason that the Torah says day one. It's not me. I'm not stealing from in Nehemia. I'm not stealing from anyone. Okay. When it becomes my idea, I'll tell you.
Okay.
I gotta thank God. I tell you,
All
I
right.
think God got the address wrong. They let me be the one to make the calculation. But anyway,
All right.
the text says day one, to quote, my money's not, they're all the same time, 1,500 years ago, because there was not yet a second day. That is the commentary on day one
Mm-hmm.
from 1,000 years ago, because there was not yet. Now, why would that interest anyone? Because in a static universe,
Yeah.
it makes no difference where you see time from. Zero. The only difference in perspective of time that we have in this universe is because the universe is expanding. And
Yeah.
the commentary on the creation of the universe, again, from these same commentators, starts as it reads like something out of NASA, a very small point. This is not modern comment, remember, it's 1,000 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Very small point, not matter, as we say. He was dak ma'od ein bo mamash, so thin, there's no physicality. We call that stuff energy today. Dak ma'od, so thin, ein bo mamash. There's no, you can't call it air, because air has plenty of mamash. Just get caught in a hurricane, and you know how much mamash air has. And then this dak ma'od ein bo mamash, as the universe expands, changes into mamash, into matter as we know it. And that's when the clock begins. And then he says, when you finally have this again, I'm about to tell you when it showed. And then it says, the commentaries, when this first matter forms, time grabs a hold. Now, before that time is going by. But the only thing.
Where does it say that?
It's a commentary, Nachmanides and Maimonides.
Okay, Nachmanides says that before there was matter, there was no time. Basically, is what you're saying.
I say that. I say when matter form. He writes this: Mishia Yesh. When we finally get matter, time grabs hold. Yitfos bozman. Mishia Yesh. Yitfos bozman. Straight statement.
Okay.
So that's in his commentary on Genesis chapter 1, verse. I don't remember, 1 or 2 or 3. One of his first few verses. I could put. So time grabs a hold. Now, before that, time is going by. But he uses the word tofes, but it grabs hold because energy is outside of time.
Mm-hmm.
The time is only linked into something. So that's the beginning of the biblical. That's the beginning, I call it the cosmic clock. Now comes Jerry Schroeder. Okay. So I say, when is the first matter that formed? And I have no wiggle room here. I'm stuck. Electrons, protons. What's the first stable matter? Well, let's say electrons are formed when neutrons decay. Neutrons decay into protons and electrons. Neutrons are not stable unless they're inside an atom. Okay, so they have a short half-life of a few minutes. So that's the reason that electrons and protons match, that the universe, protons are positive. By convention, we call protons positive, electrons negative, and that's why they match, because neutrons, like the word neutral, are essentially, in simplistic talk, a combination of a proton and electron. But they disintegrate, and then you have a proton, an electron. That's the beginning of matter, because protons define matter. If I say I have an atom with 1 proton, I'm saying hydrogen. I say an atom with 2 protons, helium, 6 protons, carbon, 8 protons, oxygen. I mean, my background is nuclear physics. And the earth science is just lucky. There's 2 things together, or fortunate. I was told once, I was on with Pat Robinson once, and I said, I was just lucky. And he said something, it was I apologize for getting off track, but it was a huge lesson. I said, I was just lucky. And he said to me, you weren't lucky. You were blessed. Now, not blessed like, oh boy, I'm blessed. No, it's a gift. He said, it wasn't luck. You studied physics and earth sciences so you could put these together. It wasn't luck. I mean, it wasn't like being like you deserved it, it's like a gift, we think some things are, what I'm getting at, right? It's nothing.
Well, I think there's this thought that luck is like this kind of force in the universe, and we can influence it. Sometimes we can't influence it, right? We can do things that cause bad luck, and that's not a Torah concept, that there's such a thing as
Yeah.
luck, right? Meaning like
So, well, anyway, so
all right.
anyway, you're getting to being blessed. But in any event,
Yeah.
so when so what's the first stable matter that forms? Protons.
Yeah.
Protons. So I say the clock of the Bible, because it says when the matter forms, time grabs a hold. Mishiyesh Yitfos. That's Maimonides. Actually, it's Nachmanides, the two of them together, but I'll stick with Nachman. So time grabs a hold when stable matter forms.
Uh-huh.
So that's the beginning of Jerry Schroeder's calculation. Okay.
Yeah.
And the calculation that we see time from. So the Bible sees time from there looking forward.
Yeah.
We see time looking back from today.
Mm-hmm.
We measure 14 billion years looking back. The Torah makes 6 days looking forward, however it is goes. And with those two different perspectives, you get a universe that can be 14 billion years old or only a few thousand years old. They're both true. Just
Okay. So when they all right. So all right. So talk to me about, so there are radiometric dating systems like potassium argon and uranium lead. So when those date a rock, and that rock gives a date of, 1 billion or 2 billion years. I don't
yeah,
think we have rocks
true.
on Earth that are more than 2 billion years old according to those dating systems, or those methods. You're saying that, what are you saying? From the
I'm saying
perspective,
the Earth is, if I'm doing it from memory now, I had a bad fall about half a year ago, and it really knocked out.
I'm
Besides,
sorry to hear that. Okay.
it has affected my memory, so I do these some memory now. But the Earth is about I think it's 4.6 billion years old. I think that's the number that the Earth is. 4 billion years old, or 4.5 billion years old. The Earth is that old. The universe is just under 14 billion years old. On Earth, as we measure time, and that's where we live. I mean, we're in a measure.
Mhm.
You measure it on Earth. Even before that, but we're using Earth-based clock.
All right.
The radioactive measurements of the decay of those nuclei that you measured quite accurately. The choices were 100% correct. That we have an Earth that's billions of
Yeah,
years.
I'll hear people say, well, they've done carbon-14 dating on the age of the Earth.
Oh, yeah. So I hope you correct them with that. Yeah.
No, yeah, carbon-14, even according to the most maximalist claims, doesn't go back, millions of years. So, all right.
The half-life of carbon-14 is about 5,000 years.
Right.
So I mean, after like 20 half-lives, there's nothing left to measure.
Right. So you're saying maybe 100,000 years. Okay. All right. So
No, like what did you say? I heard a sentence about 100,000 years.
no. So you said that this is 20 half-lives, so 20 times
Oh,
5,000. So
I'm just for the
but I
number.
think it's considered accurate to 50,000 years, if memory serves me. I could be
Yeah,
wrong.
I have
Anyway,
no problem with that, but for sure it isn't measured to billions of years.
right, for sure. So all right. So in any event,
But let your readers know, because you said it before. There are about
right.
6 radioactive clocks.
Uranium, lead, potassium, argon.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you take uranium lead dating and you find a rock that says it's 2 billion years old,
I have one
you're
right in the next
saying,
room. I
do
can pull.
you? Okay.
It
So
was
you're
a
saying
gift.
you're saying this isn't a satanic lie of the scientists who want to destroy our faiths. It's actually correct.
It's
So
it's from as we measure time on this, it's absolutely correct. And the argument, I had this once in front of a whole group of students, and their teacher was there, and he had always taught a young Earth, and he started saying how the flood could have caused the change, because that's often an argument. Well, the flood would have mixed up the flood messed up nothing, because we happen to have uh, fossils from before the flood that were dated in several different ways, not just radioactive, and they match. The flood couldn't have changed the flood, but kids, in brief, the flood could not have changed the radioactive decay of these elements. It takes nuclear events like atomic bombs to change rates of decay.
which we've had atomic bombs, so there's a little bit of a problem, but that's
I've actually seen quite a few.
Right. I understand you were involved in nuclear testing. I think we mentioned that in the
Yeah, you're
last
part of
interview.
the SALT talks, the strategic arms limitation.
Okay. So, all right. So, let me ask this question. So you talked at the beginning about the plate of silver with the apples in it, and which is a phrase from Song of Songs, if I'm not
Proverbs
mistaken.
25. I think it's Proverbs 25.
Oh, Proverbs 25. Okay. It's from, you said King Solomon. All right. So it's so what you're saying is there's metaphor in the Bible and there's non-literal meanings. So from a so if you were to get in a time machine, which you'll probably tell me doesn't exist because you're a physicist, but if you were to get in your TARDIS and travel back and meet Adam, was there a literal man named Adam that walked the earth and he had a wife named Chava, Eve? Do you believe that that was the case?
I think for certain there was, and there were other
Okay.
Homo sapiens sapiens around at the same time. He
Oh.
was the first Homo sapiens sapien to have a soul and a neshama. That's verse 26 and
Ah,
verse 27
wow.
of Genesis chapter 1. Makes it very clear. Genesis, this is from memory now, so anyone looking it up in the Bible, it's Genesis chapter 1, from verse 26. I hope you remember. God says,
Mm-hmm.
let us make Adam, not
Mm-hmm.
us Adam. Let us
Mm-hmm.
make. I'm emphasizing the verb now. Let us make Adam.
Mm-hmm.
And the next sentence says, God created the Adam. The English misses that totally. The.
Mm-hmm.
God, I say, Peggy Ketz pointed that out to me, a woman named Peggy. God said, let us make Adam. Making is a process verb. In Hebrew, it takes time and
Uh-huh.
stuff. And that's why it says for 6 days, the Lord, it's in the opening, God created the heavens and the earth. And then later in chapter 2, it says, for 6 days, the Lord made the heavens and the earth. Made, Asiya, takes time and stuff. Creation does not. So, and Nehemia, stop me if I'm blabbering away too much, please.
No, no, this is great.
Okay. So Genesis chapter 1, verse 26, God says, let us make, and I'm emphasizing make Adam, stuff and time. The next sentence says, and God created the Adam. Well, if I got Adam made in verse 26, why do I have to create him in verse 27? Okay, because the making is the physical body, creation is something from absolute nothing, and it brings whatever it brings into the world, it brings it in instantaneously. So something over time was made Adam, and it's Adam there. But the next sentence says God creates the Adam. The Hebrew has the in front. The Adam, et ha'adam, the Adam. And that creation can't be his body, or it's mentioned in verse 26. That creation is the spiritual creation, the soul. Because according to all ancient comments that I've read, and I have not read all ancient commentary by a long shot, but I've read a lot of it, and that all commentary says there was one physical creation, the opening sentence of the Bible. Okay, the next, all the other creations are spiritual. So so when God says in verse 27 of Genesis chapter 1, God creates the Adam, that's a spiritual creation. It changed a Homo sapien person into a Homo sapien human.
Wow.
That's the problem.
Wow.
No,
All right. So I want to
I'm
just
not, Nehemia, I promise you, I'm not bending it any way. God forbid
no,
it.
I'm not saying you're bending it. I want the audience to understand because there's some subtleties here. So we have two Hebrew verbs, asa, ayin, sin, he, and you're saying that's a process, that's to make, and there's bara, bet, resh, aleph, which is to create what we call ex nihilo, something out of nothing. And so
Only God does creation. People can
all right.
make it.
So in
Okay.
verse 26, God said, let us make man. But then in verse 27, it says, and he created man. And
Now
that
let's use the word
creation was
Adam. Let
something
us
out of
make Adam.
nothing.
Let us say make Adam. He make Adam, and God creates the Adam.
The
Yeah.
Adam, ha-adam. Okay. So, okay. But it also, it says, Zachar and Nekeva barotam. He created them, male and
Yeah.
female.
Yeah.
So I'm looking at it
Beautiful.
right
Yes.
here. So,
Great, isn't it? Yeah.
so,
He called their name Adam. No, Nehemia,
yeah.
it's so beautiful. And he called their name Adam. That sentence
Mhm.
you just quoted ends, and he called their name Adam. We don't even know if that Adam verse in Genesis could have been Adam and Eve, because he called their
Well, it
name.
says what male and female he created them. That's
Exactly.
female as well.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
Yeah.
so. All right. So if I could put in maybe layman's terms, and correct me if I'm wrong. So you're arguing that evolution took place. There was an Australopithecus afarensis, which evolved into, I don't know, into some later.
Use the word developed. If you skip out the word evolved, use the word developed.
Okay, developed into more advanced hominids, and then at one point God decided this particular, I hope hominid is the right word, this particular hominid I'm going to give a soul, and it's no longer going to be an animal, it's going to be a ha'adam, a human being. Is that what you're saying?
100%. And those hominids,
Okay, wow.
saying the Homo sapiens sapiens, they go back over 120,000 years. They look just like you and me. And your brains, they invented farming 11,000 years ago, long before Adam. That takes brains.
But those were people who didn't have souls.
They were people. They weren't humans.
Okay. Do all humans today have souls?
Well, I live in the Middle East, so I have to question sometimes. But
joking aside, right? Meaning like you could say, well, Hamas isn't responsible for raping little boys and killing people because they're not human, right? But no, that's the atrocity of it. When a lion kills a person, nobody says what a immoral lion, because lions, that's what they do. Right. Yeah. When a human kills another human, then it's because they have a soul that makes it so abominable.
Yeah, it makes them responsible. Yeah. Your description was 100% of what I was thinking. I thank you for making that statement. Yeah.
Okay. So all right. Wow. So this is mind blowing, because here's what I find what Kent Hovind and other young Earth creationists teach. I find it very attractive, because it has this very literalistic approach, right? All the scientists are wrong. The world is only 6,000 years old. And when you find a tree down in a coal mine, it's really a tree that couldn't be more than 6,000 years old. And at the same time, I feel like I have to do these mental gymnastics to make it work.
Yeah. It's very
yeah.
If you don't, no, I was just going to mention another person that is very much like yourself. That I won't mention. And you probably know the name also. If I can turn off the speaker for a second, just tell you.
Or we'll edit it out. I have an editor here, just if you want to say it.
You know whose name is Zola Levitt? Do you remember? Did you ever know Zola Levitt?
He interviewed me once. Yeah, okay. I've met Zola Levitt.
We met. He read my book. He said it changed it. He said it changed his life, because he'd always been a young Earth person, and suddenly realized there's no reason for the gymnastics.
Would you mind leaving it in? I mean, it's up to you.
I don't mind. No, I was a good friend of his. I slept in his house.
Leaving in that you mentioned his name, if that's something that you're comfortable with.
No, I didn't know if you were comfortable with it.
Yeah, no, I think people would find that interesting. That look, I'm not a Christian, right? So if the part of the audience that's Christian is saying, well, it's just those Jews. Yeah. And the Jews, they don't take it literally, and that okay. And look, there's things that this is one of the things I asked Kent Hovind. I said, well, you'll agree there are things that aren't meant to be taken literally, and of course he agreed, right?
Yeah. I take it literally, but you have to understand the perspective of the Bible.
Right. I was once having a conversation with a flat earther, and I mean literally a flat earther. And there's a verse in Yeshayahu in Isaiah which says, "The heavens is his throne and the earth is his footstool." Yeah. And this flat earther told me that's literally true. God sits in a really big chair with his feet on. I'm like, okay, that's just stupid to me. I mean, I shouldn't insult other people's beliefs, but from my perspective, that's irrational. Obviously, that's a metaphor, and yes, the Bible is full of metaphors. So now this brings us to for me, what's a fundamental question. When it says God made man out of the earth, out of a clump of dirt, you're saying that's metaphorical? What do you say?
Chapter 2, verse
27.
Yeah.
Here it's verse 7. Vayitza Hashem Elohim et ha'adam afar min ha'adama. And the Lord God made the man dust from the earth. So is
Me.
that, what's that?
I see. Yeah,
Yeah. Oh,
I see it
well,
as
no, it's Vayitzer there,
it's
Yetzah.
so double unit. There's two
Right,
units in that, by the way.
right, right, right.
Other, other,
So,
other than the Yotzo, when he forms the animal, is only one unit. There's a nice little drash on that, but okay.
all right. Well, and you can share that, Josh, too, but the I guess the non-literal interpretation, but so you're saying that's metaphorical. God didn't
No.
actually.
He formed. I formed. I think it depends what you mean by forming. I don't think he did it like a potter that he formed him. I think that's why I don't use the word evolution. Having discussed with it, the problem
Okay.
with evolution, it didn't need to have, but it's been built into it that the first stage in evolution is random mutations, random changes. The word random is the problem. So I say developed. That life did develop by God twinkling, because I don't see how, anyway, in my understanding, that rocks and water and all the oil slimes or whatever, when well, were no oil slimes, rocks and water, and that's what you have.
So
Turn into life.
so is
No
this
way.
what could I call this? Could I call your approach guided evolution?
I call it guided development. Okay, guided
Right.
evolution. Yeah. Okay, if it's guided,
Okay.
yeah, yeah,
All right.
yeah. I
So
think perfect.
so in other words, what you're saying is in Genesis 2:7, and God formed man out of, or Adam, the man or humankind, dust from the earth. He did it through a process that took from from some sort of perspective millions of years. Is that
Yeah, that's where it's formed. It's sorry, or it wasn't. But if it had said, "And God created," notice it doesn't say God created Adam from a bunch of. It's God formed. And yet, so those are process verbs. By process I mean stuff and time.
Tell us the drash, the non-literal interpretation of the second yud there. So the word
Oh, well,
vayitzer there is written with two yuds.
because look, when it says on God form the animals, it's spelled with a one. V'yatzar is spelled
Mhm.
with a one unit. It's a Hebrew letter. Yud. It's the 10th letter of the Hebrew alphabet. It's the
Right.
beginning. Yeah, it sounds like yeah for the English speakers, and and the when it says God formed, it's the animals. It's same sequence of word. God formed the animals. This, and this. God formed the atom. This. But the viatzar for the form is for animals is one yud.
Mhm.
And yud is the first letter of God's explicit name in Hebrew.
Hmm.
So they get one soul. Adam gets two yuds, gets a double soul. All life, all animal life has the first, it's the creation, which is God creates these animals. And that's the nephesh. All animals have a soul, a nephesh. It's a soul that's of life. It's the soul of life. I don't know how more to say that. And the other next, but we get a nephesh because we're part animal. And then verses go by, and then God creates the Adam. That's the second soul. So we have a nephesh and a neshama. The nephesh knows me, and I've got to survive. That's why animals' basic instinct is food, survival, and just stand. Even if you have a pet, I don't suggest doing that. But I had a friend of mine wanted to pet one of his favorite, I don't know, it was a cat or what he was eating. Well, that caught a bunch of stitches in his hand. Because although he'd been feeding this particular animal for a decade or so, he made the mistake of putting his hand near the animal's head and food. And that's the nephesh. It's all about me. And there are people who are nephesh dicks, that they think the world is spinning. That's the great song. Let me tell you, babe, this world isn't spinning just for you alone. It's a great, wonderful song. The neshama takes the me, and it makes it like we or us. The neshama knows that there's a spiritual oneness that connects the whole world, that everything you do affects. The further it is from you, the less the effect, but has effect, it's universal. So the neshama knows, the jargon I think would be the other. The neshama knows that you have to act in a way that's decent to other people. There you see people that are nephesh people throw the garbage in the street, and they don't even care about it.
Mhm.
I have to walk in that street, so I'd have to walk by his garbage. Even
I want to summarize in maybe more English simple terms. There's the way the word in Genesis 2:7 is spelled has what we would call maybe an extra yud, which isn't actually necessary for the spelling of the word. And that indicates that humans have both a maybe this life force and some kind of a soul, which animals don't have. Is that summarize basically what you're saying?
Yeah, yeah. Right.
Okay.
If any dog lover would know, dogs would say the dogs have a soul, but we have a higher soul.
Okay. All right. But all human beings, all Homo sapiens alive today, because here we're in
Yes,
dangerous
I
territory.
agree with you before you even say it. They all
Okay.
have the neshama. They're all
Okay.
humans. They're all humans.
Because for example, there are these what do they call, like Christian identity, which is kind of like this white supremacist movement, who say that they're actually descended from different line, that Jews are physical descendants of. They have this weird theology that they're physically descended from Satan, who raped Eve and produced offspring, which was Cain, right? And so they want to say there are humans who don't have the same inherent. They're not made in the image of God in the way that others are, and that's where we get into really dangerous territory, I think.
I
Certainly from a Tanakh perspective, it's un-Torah. Okay.
I don't see the basis for that theologically. I mean, maybe they can try to read something into verses. They talk about trying to read that. I would not call that the golden apple. I would call it the rotten apple.
Well, so there's an old joke that it's not a joke. The Greek word for parshanut, for interpretation, is exegesis. Jesus is reading, Gesis, right? And X is from, and then there's eisegesis, which is you read into, right? It's not a joke. That's actually
I never
what
heard
the
that. Right?
terms. So what they're doing is eisegetical, right? They have a racist doctrine they're trying to justify, and they're grasping at straws in the biblical text to try to read something into it, which you would never get that from the biblical text alone. But if you're trying to explain, okay, I know this person's inferior to me because I'm a racist bigot, how do
Yeah.
I explain that from the Bible? That's basically what they're doing.
Yeah.
Okay, so I mean, this is kind of mind blowing. And look, Dr. Schroeder has many books he's written. We're going to put links on my website, nehemiaswell.com, where you
I
can
just say
click
one
and
thing about
get
the
his book.
animals.
Please.
There's no time now. There's no time. I won't say it.
No,
But
there's time. I think we have like another hour technically. So go ahead. There's as much time as you need. Go ahead.
yeah, that the Bible gives the ages of people. There's nothing super. Later, I'll get into something else if you remind me about a subtlety of why nothing superfluous in the Bible. But the Bible gives the ages of people. Now, why does the Bible break our heads? It's hard enough to study the Bible, let alone have to know that Adam lived 130 years till they had this third kid Seth, and Seth 105 years till we'll talk about that fall. In any event, why do we have to know these ages? Because they let us form a calendar. Otherwise, there'd be no 6,000 year calendar that people are concerned with. The only reason they have, because you add up all the ages in the Bible, they're all given, and you add kings and queens, and it comes to a number less than 6,000 years. Not the biblical, but you get to the end of the Hebrew Bible, and then you have to add kings, queens, and everyone else, or the Christians would add on Jesus, etc. And you get to less than 6,000 years. If the numbers hadn't been given, if the ages of people hadn't been given, there'd be no calculation, no problem. So the ages are given. And why was I getting onto this point? Sorry, I forgot. I was getting that for a reason.
You're talking about why is it that we're told the ages of the people? Because it gives us a calendar.
Yeah.
And so I think really the question for me from that is, I think, are you saying that from the time that Adam and Eve were given a neshama, a soul, that the world really is about 6,000 plus minus, right?
From the
Give or
moment
take a couple hundred years,
exactly. Because then it says Adam lived 130 years, have a kid named Seth.
Yeah.
So they're doing that on Earth, not in outer space. So that's it. From Adam on, it's an Earth-based calendar. Okay. Now, so we add up those years and we see how long ago Adam was. Then Barbara, my wife is Barbara Sofer. She writes every 2 weeks for the Jerusalem Post called The Human Spirit. It's really worth getting on her blog. Her pen name is Sofer. She has a blog just for you, the readers, I'm saying, she has a blog she has thousands of people from, but it's work. Every Friday, she puts out about a 20 line or 20 line or so on Facebook. I don't have Facebook, it's her Facebook. Sofer, her name was B.
And
Sofer.
you said this is who is this?
My wife.
Your
My wife.
wife. Okay, Barbara Sofer.
Sofer
We'll
is
put a link on my website as well.
okay, she's a pen name.
Okay.
Sofer means writer. In fact,
Right.
it was the name before we married, and her professional
Okay.
name remained. So she
Right.
has a website, and every Friday she puts out a blog of about 15, 20 lines in which she spends hours on a summary of what we're reading in the Bible the next day in the synagogue. So if you want to go through the Hebrew, a summary in English, it's written in English. And then you go, so what am I getting? Okay, leave that aside. So if we add up all the years going to, here's what I was getting at. Barbara and I are in London giving lectures back to back. She's a great speaker and a great writer. We have an afternoon off. We go to the British Museum, not the Science Museum, the British Museum in London. We walk in on the Mesopotamian wing now. It's a wing, a whole wing. And what do we see? A sign, the first cities, a whole section related to the first cities that are known in the world, not the first little towns, the first big cities. They date back to Nehemia, the time of Adam. National Geographic a half a year ago had something very similar. They date back. The year is given. They say such and such, approximately this and years ago, the first cities appear. I look at the number. I say, Barb, look at the number. Of course, they give it in BCE. Okay, they say BC. So you have to add 2,000 years onto that. It matches the Bible. I know the number because I work with this stuff all the time. So it matches Adam. It matches Adam. I say literally, fully, thank God, the curator of this entire exhibit was, and I say it literally, thank God, because these people are busy all the time, and he was there to answer my question. I didn't mention Adam. I didn't mention Neshama. I didn't mention Bible. Nothing. Why did the cities form at this time? That was my question. You know what his answer was? We have no idea. We have no idea because it's strange, because the population explosion of humans starts thousands of years earlier when farming is invented. Farming is invented 11,000 years ago. We're talking about something like 6,000 years ago. There's thousands of years. Why didn't it? So he said, we have no idea why suddenly, and it's sudden. And you know what the answer is? He gives a year that's about 200 years after the biblical date, okay? And he gives, I think it's something, he gives it in BC, but you add the 2000. So what does it mean? I know what it means. The neshama, before the creation of the neshama, they were Homo sapiens all around, but they weren't humans. They were people. They had all the drives of an animal, but all the skills of a human, opposing thumb, intelligence to invent farming, how to trick this one to, make, they were animals, okay? The neshama comes into the world, and for the first time ever, you could have people of different clans that smell differently and had different, folks and grand folks live together. You couldn't have a city before the neshama, because if you didn't look like me, talk like me, and come from my mishpacha, extended family, my chamula, if you're talking in the Middle East, I had you for dinner, either roasted or boiled. I mean, it was literally a dog-eat-dog world. The neshama changed the world, and for suddenly, people that weren't from the same family line, the Hebrew would be chamula or mishpacha, chamula, if could live together. You couldn't have a city before this. What's amazing at this time also, in fact, that's what the plaque says beside the timing. However, I'm just like seeing it in my head. However, the most important discovery of the time was the invention of
agriculture.
What did you say, poker?
No, I said agriculture.
No, that goes back 4,000 years.
Oh, okay. What was the most important discovery?
Writing.
Okay.
Now, why was writing invented? Because cities appeared. And what happens with cities? Now, Sam and his family lives in the city. Frank and his family live on the farm. All rainy season, all winter long, Sam in the city is weaving baskets, because he has not, and Frank on the farm is growing corn. Comes the spring, Sam in the city picks up his 50 big storage baskets, carries them out to Sam on the to Frank on the farm, and Sam in the cities for Frank on the farm. You need these baskets; they breathe, and you can store your corn until you should have corn for the whole year till you get there's no supermarkets now, and it won't get moldy. And Frank on the farm says, Sam, you're a gift from heaven. I really need those storage baskets. I'll give you 2 baskets full of corn for your family if you'll give me the other 48 baskets for me. And Frank and Sam from the city says, good deal. I'll trade you these for 2 big baskets for my family. Then Frank breaks the bad news. Sam from the city, you came out 2 weeks too early. The corn won't be ripe for another 2 weeks. Don't break your back carrying the baskets back to town. Leave them here and write out. And that's why all the first writing is economic translations. All the first writing is in Hallelujah, there's a God. All the first writing is Frank on the farm and Sam owes this in the city owes this and that. Frank, writing is invented because of because of trading. Trading is invented because of division of labor. Division of labor is because Frank lives on the farm and Sam lives in the city, and they do separate stuff. And that all
so trade is the basis of civilization, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Of at least the writing part of civilization. So let me understand. So let's go back around 6,000 years. What is it? 5,780.
80. Something about 6,000.
3, 4, whatever. Around 6,000 years. So we have a human being. His name is Adam, and he has a wife named Chava. Are there other people who have souls at that time who aren't their physical descendants?
No, and that's I would say. Oh, I get you. I'm going to say 2 things about this. First, let me say what's on my mind, and then please do that again. What's interesting about the age that's given at the British Museum for the first cities is a few hundred years after the biblical age of Adam, which is exactly what would be needed because the soul has to spread. The soul spreads biologically and, according to Rashi, sociologically also. Okay, but in other words, so I think to answer now your question, I think one couple gets the soul, and it spreads. Also biologically and also sociologically. I mean, supposing you are soulless, okay, and you're mom and dad and you have kids and they're soulless, but they see this family over there and they got really something going for them. Look, they sing on Friday nights. I mean, they just seem to have a better life. Junior, why don't you go play with those kids? Maybe you pick something up from them. And Junior picks up the neshama because if Rashi's correct, the commentator Rashi from the year 1190 approximate, that 1090 from the year 1090 approximate, that 1050, I beg your pardon, Rashi 1050, that says we see one particular place where it implies that if a souled person, an ensouled person, raises another child that wasn't from souled parents, that child will have a neshama also. In other words, the neshama is able to be instilled sociologically as well as biologically. Okay.
So at the time of Adam and Chava, which you take to be Adam and Eve, you take to be literal people, if I understand correctly.
I think so.
There may have been thousands of people in the world, tens of thousands maybe. Not every one of them was given a neshama, but by a couple hundred years later or something, that soul had spread to every human being. Is that?
I don't know if to every human being, but it certainly had spread enough so you could start having cities. Notice there were only cities in the Middle East. There were only cities in the Fertile Crescent. There weren't cities over in China yet. The soul hadn't spread. It doesn't mean that the Chinese are inferior because they hadn't. No one had souls in those days. It was only this one little and it spread.
Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned China. So when I lived in China for a year, and I was a high school teacher there, and my students used to tell me that what they were taught is that every human today is descended from they said a monkey, but they meant an ape, right? And they said we're descended from a different monkey than you're descended from. I said, what do you mean? And they said, well, they found fossils, Australopithecus robustus. They found, used to be called Peking man, and Chinese people are descended from that. I don't even think it was a hominid. Australopithecus, right? He didn't walk up anyway. And then we're descended from something else, right? So that's what they were taught. I don't think mainstream anthropologists or physical anthropologists accept that. I think that might have been just what their ignorant teacher taught them. But you're saying that, or are you saying that not every human being today is a physical descendant of Adam and Eve? Some are descended from people who were the idea of an neshama was transmitted to them, a soul was given to them.
I know I never thought of it that way,
Sociologically.
but I would say yes, they still the same neshama, because when
Yeah.
neshama comes to the world and it bifurcates, it spreads. And again, and the commentary of Rashi said about how you can get it biologically. It says these are the children. Oh, I'm sorry, of Moses. I don't have the exact, but then it mentions Aaron's children also. Okay, I don't remember the verse, but I remember the context of it, and it's because those children had been raised and influenced by Moses. I guess that's what the point being, that's how they could be called children of Moses, even though they were children of Aaron. It happens in the book of Esther
So
also.
in the Andaman Islands, there's a famous island called North Sentinel Island, which, according to mainstream, I don't know, anthropologists, scientists, has been cut off from the rest of civilization, from the rest of humankind for 10 or tens of thousands of years. They call it like the last uncontacted tribe. And there's a question about whether they've actually gone through whether they actually have fire on this island. And, it's like 500 people or something like that. We don't actually know if it's 50 or 500 people. So they were never really in contact. I'm just trying to think. It's a thought experiment, right? So the people in the North Sentinel Island, there was a Christian a few years ago who said, these are the last people who have never heard the good news of Jesus. And he went to what they call share the gospel with them, and they killed him, right? Because they killed him because they've had bad experiences with people coming in the past and kidnapping. I think it was the British government or the Indian government kidnapped like 10 or 20 of them to try to bring them back and teach them the language, and then teach them our languages, and so we could communicate with them, and then they ended up dying of disease. So they have bad experiences with strangers coming and kidnapping them. But the people who are there who don't have virtually they have no knowledge of the outside world except the boats they see go by and the planes maybe they see fly over, right? There's never so do they have a neshama? And you don't have to answer. It's just kind of a thought experiment here. So a young Earth creationist would say, let's get to the flood. A young Earth creationist would say everyone on the North Sentinel Island is a descendant of Noah, a physical descendant of Noah and his children. So talk about the flood.
I have no. We know about. I've talked about. Well, one thing is very interesting about the flood is just before the flood. Now I'm bypassing your question to talk. Just before the flood, why does God bring on the flood? Because the world. I'm almost certain it's chapter 10, but I'm not sure it's chapter 10.
Chapter 6.
It's chapter. Well, it's where it's Exodus.
No, the flood is Genesis chapter 6.
Okay.
And you're looking for verse 5. It says, Rabba ra'at Adam ba'aretz, great was the evil of man on the earth. B'chol yetzer machshavot libo, and all the yetzer of the thought of his heart was only evil all day long.
Okay.
That's chapter 6, verse 5.
Okay, I'm going a bit further than that then. When does it say the flood's going to come? I've got the wrong glasses, I guess.
So that is, well, I mean, technically you could say it says it in the previous
wait a second. Let me just keep
verses.
further here because
in 6:3 it says, my soul will not remain upon man.
When the world was full with violence.
Yeah.
Where does it say that?
So you're looking for verse 11.
What chapter?
But chapter 6, verse 11 says, "Vatishachet haaretz lifnei Elohim, vatimele haaretz Hamas."
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So tell your readers about. Or maybe you did already. Have you told them?
Well, I'm gonna do a separate discussion on that, but please you share your so the word for violence there is Hamas, but
Yeah.
Hamas is
The readers realize it's literally Hamas, and
yeah.
we read that on the day when Hamas attacked our people on October 7th.
Mhm.
That was the portion that we read in the synagogue that day. It's like it's frightening. And it says, and the word there for you're going to do a section on, so I don't preempt you. Just
No, please go ahead. Share
every place
your
that
thoughts.
it says violence, the
Mhm.
Hebrew text there is. I'm going to make here's my glasses.
Is Hamas the
Is
last?
Hamas. And at the end of this, it says, and God says, that Hamas must be destroyed, that the violence must be destroyed. And the word violence, you readers, you'll hear from Nehemia in more detail, but the word for violence is Hamas. It's not like changing the transliteration. That's what the Hebrew it says, and that's how you pronounce it. It's the exact same sounding word. Now, Hamas for the Arabs, it's abbreviations of several things, but no one knows. I doubt if there's a person listening to them that knows but everyone calls it Hamas, and the UN calls it Hamas, and the American president calls it Hamas, and everyone calls it Hamas, because it is Hamas. The world, and in the Middle East here, we call it Hamas. And if we read it in the synagogue that day.
Yeah, it almost sounds like it's prophetic.
Yeah,
and maybe not almost.
Yeah, it was because we tore the country apart politically, and God says, "You want to tear it apart? Run the system yourself." And God stepped back. The attack was coming. The result. This is now Jerry Schroeder. Okay, the attack was going to happen. You don't build 500 kilometers worth of however 500 of tunnels, and you have weapons, and you have machines that can fly in the air that can carry people. It was all happening. That wasn't what brought on the attack. I mean, our being separated, but the fact that we were torn politically, people may not realize, but our country was torn politically into two camps as whether we should reform our Supreme Court. It wasn't getting rid of democracy. That's what the people against reform were so though they're trying to destroy democracy. It's not true. In my opinion, we're trying to make sure democracy is balanced. Our Supreme Court is the strongest Supreme Court in the world. It has power that no other Supreme Court has. And they're not elected officials. They're appointed by themselves. It's not like I just plead for one thing. Make it like the American system where each new justice is vetted. It may be brutal. I mean, we listen to, some of these vettings on the American TV that gets here. It's almost brutal, but it keeps your Supreme Court honest. Not just honest, but how should I say, directed to what it's supposed to do. We don't have that here. So it's a problem. I'm not going to get into it. I never took part in the
Aharon Barak was once described by an American judge as I think they called him a judicial buccaneer in the sense of a pirate.
Oh, yeah.
So, but anyway, that's a whole separate issue.
Yeah, I just want to say, what the result of the attack was, and the attack was coming, but the disaster of the attack was because God stepped back and said, "You want to tear your country apart? I'll help you get it back together." Because the entire password of this war is in Hebrew yachad, togetherness. I've been with the IDF. I don't want to get into my history with the, but I was part of it. I'm an old guy now, but we never had the byword. We're together. Only this because we were torn apart, and it's so. But anyway, I don't want to get into the politics, but it's so sad. And okay, let's leave that aside. But
Hamas, I would just say as a side point that I don't think it's just a coincidence that Hamas is called Hamas. When they formed their organization, these were people who had some knowledge of Hebrew and Israeli culture. And I think they chose that word very deliberately, right? It is an acronym in Arabic for the Islamic resistance movement, but it couldn't have been lost on them, the significance of this word in Hebrew as well. And by the way, in Arabic, it has a meaning which is intensity in war and religion, right? Basically, it's being a zealot. That's what Hamas means in Arabic. It's hard to believe that they weren't aware of it. Look, Yahya Sinwar, who now is the leader, he wasn't before. He speaks fluent Hebrew. What was different between Hamas and the PLO is Arafat was born in Egypt, didn't know the first thing about Israel, didn't know the first thing about Palestine. Hamas is different. They grew up in under Israeli rule. They were formed under Israeli rule. They had served times in Israeli prisons before they broke off and formed their Islamist movement.
We cured him of some kind of disease.
Yeah, he had a heart disease that Israel cured him of. Well, he's not the founder, but the point is the founders back in the 80s, they were, a lot of them were very well versed in Israeli culture and the Hebrew language. But so let's get back to the flood. So
I don't have an answer for the flood.
Fair enough. Okay.
I have no, and I used to teach until a few years ago. I taught for 25 years at a what's called a yeshiva, a place where you come to study about God. You study, and I taught science and Bible there.
Okay.
And for a few years running, about 3 years running, all the teachers got together, closed the doors, and we tried to figure out the flood. We did that for 3 years running. We never got an answer of how you can show in the world that there was a flood. I do not know from my studies, which doesn't mean I know I want to make it very clear. My earth science wasn't focused on trying to find a flood. I said I have earth science and nuclear physics, two majors. But I don't think there are strong, I don't know of data that are strongly pointing in favor of the flood. Now, other persons may have, and I'm saying I haven't studied by 1%, let us know anything of the information. However, I can say explicitly, the flood could not have changed radioactive decay chains. Okay, that temperature, no matter how hot you get water, the temperatures that change nuclear reactions occur in atomic bombs. Those are the temperatures that you require. Obviously, there's nothing left.
Look, to me, the easiest explanation is that the word for Eretz, which we translate usually as earth, could also mean land, right? Meaning, so there could have been a regional flood that flooded, parts of Mesopotamia, or the Black Sea is one of the popular theories these days. I'm not saying that's the answer. Maybe Kent Hovind is right, and the world's only 6,000 literally years old, and all the fossils in the world are explained by that, right? I don't know. I'm not an expert.
That couldn't change the
I'm saying I don't know. But so you're saying though there were fossils before the flood?
Oh, sure. The fossils from before the flood have a strata that you can guess ages of, and a radioactive age that matches the strata layer that would that if there had been a flood, they would have been changed, and they were pre-flood. Put it this way: the Bronze Age fossils are good ones. They pre-flood.
So dinosaurs weren't walking around with humans.
No, dinosaurs die about 30 or 40 million years ago. Dinosaurs are way before their people. Would you say were or were not?
What I say?
No,
I mean, this gentleman who I interviewed, he argued that there were dinosaurs on the Ark, that Noah built a really big boat, the Ark, and there were dinosaurs on the Ark.
Disappear. We know the number is quite strongly confirmed by the last 40 years, the impact in the northern part of the Caribbean off the is it Yucatan?
Chicxulub or something like that. I can never pronounce it.
Yeah.
Okay. So
that dates to the time when the and that date is around the whole world.
Let me ask you another question. So we have is it 93 naturally occurring elements?
90, I think it's 92, but I don't know.
92, 93, whatever the number is. Definitely not my field. So the standard explanation from mainstream scientists is that originally from the Big Bang. Do you believe in the Big Bang? Let's start with that.
My first book is called Genesis and the Big Bang.
There you go.
The
All
Big
right.
Bang is what I said. The Big Bang is the best news for God since Moses came down from Sinai. If you're a Christian, you could say Jesus also. But as a Jew, I say the Big Bang is the best news for God since Moses came down from Sinai. The Big Bang is just another way of saying there was a creation to our world, which was big news 40, 50 years ago, because 100 years ago, the universe was considered to be eternal.
Oh, so this brings up something which maybe if you don't want to talk about it, it's fine. It might not be your expertise. But what comes to mind for me is Olber's paradox, because the Big Bang essentially solved Olber's paradox, didn't it? That's this idea that there's an infinite number, the universe is infinite, and there's an infinite number of stars. So at night there should be no darkness because every point in the universe should end in a star.
Yeah.
And scientists struggled for centuries. Why isn't the night sky light?
Yeah. Yeah. And the answer would be, well,
the universe isn't infinite and it's expanding.
Yeah, it had a beginning, and that's it. If it was infinite in extent and infinitely old, the night would be bright.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that actually solved the problem that had been in science or Western thought going back to the Greeks.
There's for such strong data now that there was a creation. That it's just one of the founders of Robert Jasper, one of the founders of NASA, which was the beginning of the Goddard Space Agency that became NASA. They bled together. And he was one of the founders. He writes that it's a wonderful piece of literature. I have actually a copy of the original. It was in a newspaper article back, when was he? It must go back at least 40 years. And he writes, the story ends like a bad dream. We scientists have climbed the mountain of ignorance. As we finally pull ourselves over the final rock, we're greeted by a band of theologians that have been sitting there for centuries.
Well, and the term Big Bang originally was to mock the concept, if I remember correctly, right?
Yeah, Fred Hoyle on the BBC in the 1950s. Yeah,
right,
they think the Big
Bang
because
it implied God, right? Like there was a creation. So you made a statement when we were talking about the flood that you don't know of any data that support a flood. So am I right that it seems like your approach is you look at what the scientific data are and then you try to see how it fits in with the Bible and along with historical Jewish interpretation? Would you say that's your approach?
I would say that, and I'm saying if it doesn't match and it's significant, it means you just haven't found the data. But if it conflicts, as an example, that until the mid-1950s, I think it was 1950, we said that the universe is eternal, I would say the science is wrong. The Bible has a tremendously good track record of being correct. And for the Christian readers, it may sound, listeners, I want to make it, and Jewish ones even more especially, when it says that God chose the Jewish people, it doesn't mean that they're wonderful or better. It just means that they're the marker. You should make it very clear. There are only two people, two nations in the entire Hebrew Bible. That's the 5 books of Moses and all the writings and judges and etc. and Joshua and judges and etc. In all the Hebrew Bible, there are only 2 nations that God says explicitly, if I had my way, I would destroy them. One was Amalek. And that's where we relate Hamas to Amalek, and it happened to. And what's the second nation that God said if he had his way, he would destroy? It's in Deuteronomy, the Jewish people. He said, "You've been such a bunch of lousy people. You didn't follow my laws. You read it. It's chapter 33, if I remember correctly. It's such a bunch of lousy people. I give you the laws. I give you. You rebel right and left. If I had my way, I would destroy you, but I can't." Because the nations of the world, I'm paraphrasing the literal Hebrew text, but I'm paraphrasing. The nations of the world would say it was by their power. It was by their power that this happened, and they wouldn't realize that it was I that made it happen. God made a covenant with us that we would be a marker in this world. I had a very close Christian friend that her mother said to her, "You want to believe in God? Follow the Jewish people. The history doesn't make sense." And it doesn't make sense. God, and that's why God says, "I would like to destroy you, but I made you my marker, not for better. You're such a bunch of schlemiels, you don't follow my, etc., etc. But you are my marker." And it is identical to the argument that Moses used when the nations, when we've trekked through, we come out of Egypt, we're about to go into the promised land, and our forefathers say, "Oh, no. The women didn't say this, by the way. The men said it," because the text is very clear about who dies in the desert in the next 40 years. Only the men over 20 years old. And under 20, they didn't, because there's a connection between the amygdala and the frontal cortex that leaves the biology out of it. But the parents say, let's go back to Egypt. We can't beat them. And God hits the roof and says, "You know what? I'm going to destroy you and make you a new people." And what's the logic that Moses uses? He uses it in Genesis. He uses it always. It's never his logic with arguing with God is never, "Oh, they'll be good people." Moses knows the facts of life. We're always rebelling.
He's met the Jewish people.
He knows it. So what does Moses say? You can do it, but it's not in your best interest. Because if you destroy them now on the edge of going to the land, the people of the world will say that you destroyed them here at the entrance of the promised land because you weren't strong enough to beat the nations in there to give them the land. And God backs down. You can read the text. People don't like to read it that way, but it's exactly what Nehemia, and God repents. So Nehemia means repents or rethinks the actions, and he says, "You're right. I won't, but they're going to watch for 40 years now in the desert." And those people that were old enough to know better, they will perish in the desert. They won't come in. But the children under 20, will come in, because under 20, you're not responsible for the connections in the brain.
Yeah.
So, but it's always the argument. That's not going to be good. The argument works, and this is the problem that God says himself in Deuteronomy. "I would have destroyed you, but you're my marker." And look at the history of the Jews. So if you're looking for invocation of God in the world, there are many. I mean, the description, just try to look at the chemistry of how you remember anything. I just been working it before we got on the Zoom. The complexity it's frightening, and it's all going on right in here.
So you're saying that the complexity of the human brain and of life couldn't just be accidental. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, and I don't think climbing is like these arguments that are used, like Dawkins, climbing the mountain of it, that step by step. If the complexity exceeds what would normally develop over time in many people's opinion who have studied the complexity in really great depth.
There's a concept they call in intelligent design irreducible complexity, right? There are things that if you take away one element, the whole system breaks. So how could it have gradually evolved?
Yeah, okay. I've
by
heard
accident.
that. I don't think we even have to hang on to that. Just the extreme complexity of because it's always risky to say, because you have to find something that if you take one thing, but just God, I'm so apologize, but there's a book. I'm sorry, I haven't on my shelf, but there are so many wrong choices in the development of the world at each stage of mutation. There are it's like a million wrong choices and one or two that will work to make things go forward in a way that will allow for the complexity to develop towards life. Now, it didn't have to develop life, but the likelihood is so slim. Even if you look at the creation of the universe was made for complexity. The construction of an atom that has a heavy nucleus and these almost ethereal electrons that weigh, they have the same, each electron has the identical charge as the proton, but it weighs almost 2,000 times less. Why should it have the same charge if It's 1,800 times around 2,000. Why should something that's 2,000 times lighter have the integral charge of this massive proton? And it's electrons that allow life, because it's the sharing of electrons among atoms that make atoms bond to form molecules that form life. And if those electrons weren't like, if the universe wasn't like that, you couldn't share electrons, you couldn't move them, they'd be too heavy.
So you're saying even the rules of physics are so unlikely to create the elegant world in which we live that has to be divine intervention? Is that
and Scientific American a few years ago, which is totally very highly materialistic, said this is another proof that there must be an infinite number of universes.
Right. And we just happen to live in the one where everything is elegant and works out.
Yeah. There's always like an answer to the, but,
right. Well, so they need a huge amount of time and an infinite number of universes to make it work from a materialistic perspective. I know you've got a bunch of books. We're going to put links to those on the website. Any final things you want to share with the audience?
JeraldSchroeder.com. There's a God in the world. Mm-hmm. God is active in the world. I urge you, watch that Proof of God in 5 minutes, please. Because not from, you got 3 million views, it's enough of it. But, and I say I get nothing from it, zero. But it's important to have arguments of how to answer a skeptic. It is crucial that there are a lot of skeptics in the world. There is, for instance, I'll give you an example. There's a book, The Science is fantastic. It's The Universe from Nothing, by, I think his name is Cousin. The only embarrassment, pardon me for the Christians in the group, but he's a Jew that wrote it. The science is magnificent. I urge you, just forget the last chapter, because the last chapter could not be stupid enough than I can imagine. And he says, and he has quotes from Dawkins and other ones. Oh, this is the final nail in the coffin. We create the universe from absolute nothing. He fails to point out the fact that you create the universe in absolute nothing, provided you got the laws of nature. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what the Proof of God in 5 minutes is about. He in fact, he once in an interview, the author of this book, The Universe from Nothing, if you read the first or the book except the last chapter, and then at least wrap your head around the fact about the stupidity that this argues against the God, the laws of nature are what God creates the laws of nature. They predate the universe. They're not physical. They're outside of time. They can create something from nothing. That's the definition of God in this universe. And the only name for God in Genesis chapter 1 is Elohim. God is made manifest in nature. There's several names for God in the Bible, but the only name for God in Genesis chapter 1 is Elohim, and that's the name of God physically acting in the universe. God is manifest in nature. And anyway, so if you want to know the physics behind the universe, that universe from nothing is extraordinary, but you have to watch the last chapter. And when he was confronted by someone saying, but you have to have the laws of nature. Don't be a nitpicker. Who cares where they come from? The laws of nature. It's the whole story.
It's kind of an important thing, you would think.
To the world.
Yeah. Fascinating. Anyway. Wow. Thank you so much for joining us on the program. We've learned a lot. We need to have you back on to talk about so many more things.
You have been listening to Hebrew Voices with Nehemia Gordon. Thank you for supporting Nehemia's McCore Hebrew Foundation. Learn more at nehemiaswall.com.